Hello and welcome to the Filmmaker's Playbook. My name is Jason Branagan and this is a podcast all about filmmaking. My guest this week is writer and director Waris Islam. Waris's directing credits include TV shows like The Bay, Vera, Holby City and EastEnders. Plus, he wrote and directed on the BBC series Bishaash and has multiple feature films in development. Today, Waris and I discuss how he got started in the industry, breaking into television, pros and cons of shadowing as a training mechanism, working with agents, the writing process versus the directing process, and much, much more. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and thank you for listening. Waris Islam, welcome to the Filmmaker's Playbook. Thank you for joining me.
How you doing, Jason? Good to be here.
I'm doing good, thank you, and it is a joy to have you here. I guess if we were to dig straight in, first and foremost, I'm going to ask, where did your interest in film and television come from?
So I have always been quite creative, but then, look, there was this art form, the film industry, that had everything. You had performers, you had designers, you had artists, writers, producers, directors, all in an institution. And it was incredible. I would remember when production would come into your town and, the crew, buses, the freeways, setting up unit base and thinking, God, this is like the circus arriving. And I knew pretty early on, around 15, 16, I just wanted to run away and join it. It was so exciting to understand that this was an actual industry. I think I made my mind up, after school, I was gonna pack a bag with a Capri Sun and change of socks, and I was gonna make my way up to LA and really make it in Hollywood. I had that kind of excitement about it. My dad sort of reining me back, saying, hang on a second, that's great, you want to do this, but why don't you have some armor around you? Get yourself a degree and you can do anything you want. So I thought, yeah, that's pretty reasonable. Good advice. So I did. I did a film degree. He's probably thinking that's not what I meant. But that was sort of my sort of academic sort of introduction to cinema. And then it was something that I continued. I did a master's in film production. I did another master's in screenwriting. I really immersed myself in that world. And I loved learning about cinema and filmmaking. And Jason, that was like early 90s, if you remember. Like there was that incredible independent cinema, low budget filmmaking scene. We had celebrity writer directors at that time. It blew up. We had Ang Lee, Mike Lee, Spike Lee, Wong Kar-wai, Chen Cage, Sofia Coppola, Catherine Bigelow, Quentin Tarantino. We had these incredible writer director auteurs just kind of exciting, these young filmmakers telling us this is the time where, you could do something yourself. So when I graduated with that in my mind, I really pursued specifically wanting to be a writer-director in film. And that's how it started really for me. When I launched myself into the industry, I kind of had two parallel careers going, I suppose. I had this passion to develop my show reel and my calling card as a director. So I was pursuing local financing for short films. And at the same time, I was building up my writing portfolio. So I wrote a spec script, to get myself out there, which did pretty well. And I was fortunate, I think, to land a couple of gigs at the same time. So the spec script was picked up by First Film Foundation, which was a program back in the day, which developed young talent and developed your project and introduced you to the industry with it. At the same time, my short film got commissioned too. So I found myself making this short, which did relatively well on the sort of festival circuit, as well as pushing a feature at the time. That was pretty exciting. That got me work writing radio for BBC Radio Drama. I also managed as a writer to write for Channel 4. There was another scheme there called Coming Up, which again showcased new talent on television, where you write a 30-minute drama film. And then I also got Hollyoaks, through my short film. And that sort of happened all in that sort of same time, which was pretty cool, which became my first sort of step into the industry, I think, as a TV director. Managed to hustle representation and had begun my journey in the UK, I suppose.
As you began talking about those productions rolling into town and you were saying this kind of buzz of creativity, all these different departments, you mentioned there's so many artists working. But I was curious what specifically it was then that led you to writing and directing as opposed to being pulled towards design or art department, editing, camera department. Maybe you answered it when you talked about that 90s indie filmmaking scene and that it was a case of that was the environment that you were also learning in. But I would love to get a sense of what was it that drew you specifically in that direction?
Yeah, I think I mostly defined wanting to be a writer director, of course, through my undergrad. I realized very specifically what that role was and what it meant. But I think more than anything, I was always quite drawn towards making a connection with audiences. And, the most efficient way your idea connects to people, well, that felt like it belonged to the writer or the director, And most of my wheelhouse was creating new ideas and seeing how I can connect to people with them, And I started, in youth groups, I was involved in theatre at school and I was always writing creatively. It almost felt quite natural to almost, and maybe because I was tunnel visioned at the time, it made sense that the person who is responsible for writing or creating the thing that attracts the circus was the sort of the eye of the storm that I want to be in, And I felt that sort of intuitively where I wanted to be, So when I was writing ideas, I'd find a connection to the writer and the director in all of those sort of big processes. I like the idea that you'd have to, have your own idea and sort of execute a vision. So I guess I was kind of drawn to that without quite knowing what it was. And then through my university and my training, I realized that's all I wanted to be. And with all that kind of external kind of influence happening in the sort of wider industry, the 90s, as I said, which was so sort of influential for us, young filmmakers, I almost felt like there was no other job that I wanted to do, And I felt like that since then. I feel like that today. I still feel writing, directing is exactly where I'm meant to be and what I enjoy doing. I don't think I have the skill set for, the other great departments. And I've learned this along the way. But I think that's where I feel I've got, I've got something.
So when you are living in that space, you have optioned your spec, first film foundation. You have a short film that's doing really well. And then Hollyoaks comes along. So what was the transition into television like for you, particularly on a show like Hollyoaks, which is a continuing drama? It's a moving train that you're kind of jumping onto. And I haven't worked on that show, so correct me if I am mistaken. As a director, you're being given scripts. You probably have a tonal meeting. You have maybe a little bit of say, but you have to come in and shoot them. So was that kind of your first time working as a director only and not also kind of being over the writing process? And I'm asking multiple questions in one here, but I guess I'd love to just get a sense of how that transition felt when you came to it and you moved into that world.
And it's a vital transition because, up until then, I'd made films where I had full autonomy. I was a writer and director for my short films. There were characters I'd conceived. So in a lot of ways, what television requires you to do is to, work with other people's characters and, illuminate in some way your version and your vision onto an already existing drama sort of series. And I think that was a big learning curve, actually, because what you're often told, when you're starting out is, about nurturing your own voice. the reason why you're in a meeting in the first place is because they're excited about, you as a director, what you bring, what voice you bring to them. And then you start directing for a show, and actually you've got a sort of, less of you and more about what is the house style, what do these characters require in this particular, episode amongst other episodes, what are your producer notes, what are the capabilities of your team, where can you take your cast and your story, it doesn't always belong to you. And that is very much, I think, in continuing drama, that is a skill set that needs to be learned and respected, And so I found that transition, the first lesson in TV. And when you're directing high volume, multi-strand, episodic television in a tough schedule, you got to learn how to be efficient, you got to learn how to make those choices very quickly and still be creative, but work well within an entire sort of production where other episodes are being made, because that continuity is essential for your audience, So that was something, that I had to learn quite quickly. And that was my kind of baptism in Hollyoaks. And, at times, I think the two things that were very difficult. One was learning to make decisions quite efficiently and quickly, at the same time being very creative in those spaces, and not seeing those parameters as restrictions, but, ways to shape a good episode that works well within the context of all these others. And I reckon, yeah, you're spot on. It is a tough sort of thing to learn, but that's important. And I think a lot of filmmakers that only do shorts, that come onto perhaps television, that is the thing that can either derail you or make you.
Definitely. Rightly or wrongly, I kind of think of it, and it was some advice that I was given early on as well, was just shoot the show. Ultimately, that's the most important thing. Shoot the show you are hired to shoot. And then for me, it was a case of, by doing that, you can build trust. And if you have trust, then you can start pushing the boat, I think, a little more creatively, challenge the house style a little bit, and see what you can do to enliven and enrich.
Absolutely. But you've also got to remember, the quality that you bring as a director is, if a show has become institutionalized and therefore complacent, your very presence invigorates the floor, the production. You bring new ideas, you excite the team. And that's also really, really vital. But don't do it at the expense of, redefining the show. You're actually trying to make that show, the best that it can be. And I think if you see that as a restriction, a lot of directors will say, well, my wings were clipped because I had to work within a particular system. I think that's a wrong attitude going into those kind of shows. I think you've got to really respect, the house that you're in before you start, messing around in that kitchen.
Totally agree. So if we're staying with TV, I'd love to look at your kind of trajectory, and then utilizing, I suppose, the early work you were doing on Hollyoaks and looking at where you are now. So I wanted to ask you about shadowing on Mr. Selfridge and working with Robert the Maestro, and how that sits within your development as a director and development working within TV.
Robbie was a great mentor. He was very generous with his time on the floor. In the coach back to unit base, we'd have conversations. And so I was very lucky to have Robbie as a mentor to allow me, to develop life lessons that I take on to this day, as a director. But that's not always the case, I think. And, you're not often paired with a director that can be that gracious with their time. So, it's an interesting one, shadowing, probably quite controversial. I would say, generally, I'm curious about whether shadowing is beneficial for a young director, if I'm honest with you. If you think about, what a director does, mostly it's relationships built with HODs and teams throughout the course of pre-production, breaking down a script, mood board to designers, rehearsal space with actors. And then, when you've reached a kind of synchronicity, you're on the floor whispering a note to a performer, less of a tenor, because everybody is in that space. As a spectator, you're not privy to that relationship or information. You're sitting back, you're watching all this happen, but you're not really engaged to be able to understand. So there's very little purchase if you're just a spectator. You got to imagine, it's almost like you shadowed a writer, I guess. It's like watching the writer type on a keyboard, but that's not, you want to be writing to actually understand what writing is, right? We write a script and you get notes and you get better. That's like directing. Directing is so interactive. What you learn is by way of actually doing the work itself, so you kind of have to direct to understand directing. And I don't know, I feel that sometimes, I know this is the industry's response to supporting young filmmakers, but I don't know if shadowing is, it's really enough to sort of support, I think a director. I think that you have to direct, really. Second unit, short films, all of these require you to take risks, give notes, learn notes, interact with storytelling and people. That's worth its weight in gold. Sitting on the sidelines, watching, I don't know if you get much from that. So I would say it has its place. You may top and tail your training with a little bit of shadowing, but it doesn't offer as many answers as I think you may think it does.
As you were then coming up through kind of the TV ranks and going from show to show and building your career, even if we were to begin at Hollyoaks, were you represented at that point in your career, or were you knocking on doors? Because I think even when you are represented, you still have to go knock on doors and you have to put work into that process. Agents aren't the answer to suddenly I have lots of work. I'd love to know kind of what that process or period was like.
It's a really good question. I think I would say, an agent's main role, more than finding you work, which I think is part of what they do, is mostly to protect you when you have it. So essentially, you want to feel that you're safe on a production. You want to feel that you're being treated fairly. You want to know that if there's any issues, you're not alone. As directors, we're a department of one. So to have that level of security as you step into a contract or a production is worth weight in gold when it comes to having representation. And particularly at the very beginning of a contract, there's so many things that you don't really want to discuss with your producer, particularly things about your rate or, how the process, how you'll be looked, after where you'll live and, in the process of it all. Those are questions that can be quite easily dealt with, with an agent. So it did make a lot of difference, and it still makes a lot of difference for me to work with an agent that allows, that just, unburdens me from all of those kind of, all of those contractual issues. But an agent is also a partner in finding your way through the industry. A good agent, I think, offers creative insight, advice about choices that you need to make. They read your work, they give notes. So, it's if they're excited about your journey, and if you're offering them stuff to be excited about, you'll have a great partnership there that will help you in any way. Now, if you only think that they should find you work, then I reckon, though that is very important, that's incredibly important, I do think that's not the only thing. you'll get out of representation.
I love what you said, which was one of the first things you said about being represented, was that agents are there to protect you when you do have the work. And this idea of being unburdened by the paperwork that comes with signing on to something that frees you up to focus on the work and not to be in the weeds of trying to negotiate your own rate with
Yeah,
producer who you're going to have to work with for the next however many weeks. And what you mentioned in terms of getting to a point in your career where you have a body of work that is sufficient enough to attract an agent, I think is also an important piece of the agent puzzle. Whereas agents are hard to find, and you do have to be in a place where it makes sense for them to take you on and to represent you and to give you all of the time and resources that they're going to have to commit to you to help you grow as an artist. As you said, the multitude of roles that they take on when you are in partnership with someone in that way. So
absolutely. I mean, you have to ask yourself, what is the purchase for an agent to take you on? Why would they take you on? And if you're able to offer that answer in, at this time right now in your career, you've got exciting things happening for you, or your spec work is really exciting, then it just makes it easier for them to see your trajectory and contribute to that. And I feel ultimately, I think agents are people that just want to be inspired by great work. They want to be part of your journey because they got into this business because they love, to see great work out there. And if they can find it in you, and if you can offer that to them, they're on the ride with you. And, that's kind of on us, I think. Who knows what happens throughout that journey? But you kind of hope that, you're both on the same train.
yeah, and that's super important to ensure that you are aligned on where you want to go, I think, in your career, and kind of what the steps and stages are. Because even though there's no linear path, I think there are still moves that make more sense than others in terms of how you grow and develop in a particular space, be it telly or be it features or whatever the case may be.
Exactly.
So as a director, what has been the biggest directorial challenge you've encountered? Or, because there may be a multitude of different experiences, I would love to just know one or some of them, and maybe how you go about solving things, because I think oftentimes the role of a director is all based on how you solve problems, puzzles, challenges as they come up.
Absolutely. It's a tough one, really, because there's always a particular challenge for every show. You might be, on a snow-capped mountain in December in Clonard doing a 18th century battle scene for Outlander, second unit. And, you've got less than half a day to shoot this sort of Jacobite Rising versus Redcoats. And that's difficult, and it's demanding, and it's technical. Or, I don't know, I did a set piece for the Bay where we had a stunt sequence where the car hits against a truck. We had to close down Morecambe for 2 days. And it was several cameras, several rigs, in-camera stuff, green screen, and crowd control, high stakes in the drama, and very expensive. And so that in itself was technically a lot of pressure. Sometimes you have intimate scenes. In Vera, I was dealing with one of the characters, suffered abuse, and to be able to facilitate an environment for the actors to feel safe, to be able to talk and give notes, and to make sure there's a bit of responsibility for your audience and the story to make sure those scenes work, is as equally difficult as those big set pieces. Throughout all my career, there's always been a difficult part. And I think what I've learned through every stage is you assume as a director you're dealing with all of these alone. It feels like a solitary experience, but the truth is directing is such a collaborative experience that if you run into trouble, you have the support of a team around you to facilitate an answer. And you may be responsible for, igniting that vision at the very beginning and delivering it right at the end. But throughout that whole process, you're not really alone. You're with a team. And if you've done your work correctly, you've listened and you've allowed them on that journey, so that when you do come to those really difficult kind of set pieces or those difficult moments, you don't feel so much the kind of pressure I think we often think we should feel, because we feel solely on our shoulders. And that's what I've learned, I think, as a director,
I love all of that. I agree wholeheartedly. I was going to ask you specifically then about that sequence in the bay. And my guess then is that process of building that sequence and prepping it and figuring out how you were going to do it came down to that collaboration with kind of stunt coordinators and visual effects supervisor, I'm going to guess. Can you talk about, when you read that on paper, you have your idea of that, but how do you then go and begin to realize it or communicate what the vision for that moment is, especially if it's something, maybe there's something in there you haven't done before?
Well, I think the first read of any script and how you connect to it emotionally and where the stakes are for your character and for the scene itself are all that matters. And you can get overwhelmed by the size of the set piece and, the technical requirements. And that can be quite seductive because, suddenly there's a little bit more, time for this particular sequence. There's stunt coordinators, there's cranes and, rain machines and rigs. And, it's an exciting time. But the simplicity of, I think, as a director, when we had, that sort of size of production value of different departments, makeup, prosthetics, to make sure the work on the actors, looks good. The stunt coordinators, who are so experienced coming in, several camera operators and crowd controls and all that kind of stuff, getting involved. But what I found, ultimately, and I think there is a buzz, there is an excitement amongst the team as we're doing something like this, if not a lot of anxiety. But what I found was my purpose throughout all of that, simplicity of that first read, that what it meant for the character in the moment that it happens. Do we still get that through all of that, noise and spectacle? Do you still connect? Well, the way I direct this scene still connect to it in the way I read it in the first place, in the way my writer and my producer envisioned that moment to feel. And I think that you have to keep an eye on, in all of this, what is essentially fairly ambitious and massive production moments, that when you go into the edit and it, you put it into the sequence, did anyone feel anything? It looks great, but I don't care. So, you really have to keep a hold of that story and that storyline and that character and that performance amongst all of that stuff. And saying that, it's a visual medium. The aesthetic is essential. You're competitive against other shows that have done this many times before. An audience is already quite well versed in all, the grammar of this, of how this, they'll know something that's low value and directed well. So you still have to, have to satisfy the demands of a sophisticated audience, but you can't ever let go of, I think, what essentially that is important is the story beat. So that was what was going through my mind over those 2 days when we were doing that particular sequence. And it's this case, I think, even in the other examples that I gave, whether it's an intimate scene with 2 people, as much as it can be for a battle charge on Outlander.
One, that's great advice. Thank you for sharing. I also think it's just a great way of making something massive manageable. You mentioned about taking the same approach to the likes of that intimate two-hander, that it's about the story beat and how that beat is going to communicate with an audience. While you are part of a team, you mentioned something when you were talking about Vera, and if I'm not mistaken, I think the language you used, which I loved, was facilitate a safe space for those actors. And while that's not entirely a solo endeavor, I think in a lot of ways it can be, because if a director does not do that and create a space that is safe or trusting for those performers to be in, no one else is really going to be able to do that. If a director is a dick,
Yeah,
as the
absolutely.
saying goes, shit runs downhill. So I would love to get a sense of how you go about creating that space or your environment on set. I think a lot of what we do as directors is create environments. I think it's a huge part of the job to ensure everyone can do the best work they can possibly do in service of whatever our vision may be. And I would love to just dig into your thoughts on that and how you go about ensuring your sets do feel safe.
That's a great question and vital, I think, because there's little pastoral care specifically for our industry or the psychosis that actors endure or crew when we have to do fairly difficult scenes, be it physical or psychological. You know, we are often are the only ones there to offer, you know, a safe space. So it's so vital. A director is responsible for that. Sometimes, you know, humility and, you know, good personality and being personable aren't necessarily a skill set that you learn in directing. It's often who you are, you know, the things that your mama taught you before you even decided to become a filmmaker. You know, you were probably principled and, you know, decent and nice. And I realized how these qualities, these human qualities, you know, in fairly pressurized environments are the most important elements and tools in a toolkit for a director. You have to also be, you know, technical, great storyteller, have a conviction of vision, you know, command and inspire a team. But I think being, you know, having a sense of humility, something that perhaps you don't learn, you know, something that that's part of your character, are really important elements to the job. And I think, you know, actors and crew who have worked in the business for so long, who spend their time, you know, in close proximity with people, really understand if someone is genuine or disingenuous. So if you go in there, you know, being yourself, being your authentic self, and being respectful and having a sense of humility about you, you're already halfway there. And if you can maintain that through a, you know, a difficult production and still be respectful and, you know, just good natured, you will find the purchase of people just, you know, feeling that they want to work with you. They feel comfortable in sharing. You gotta ask. Remember, you're asking your actor to be very vulnerable amongst not just 50 crew members, but millions of audiences. You know, that's tough. You're asking a DOP or a camera person to be right close up to what is probably, if it's a physical fight sequence with blades and blood, you're asking them to be right up close to that lens. It might affect them. You don't know what they've been through. So all you can really do, I think, is to be mindful of that. And if you're able to be, you know, just a human being about these things, you'll work your way through it. I think that's really the only way I see directing now, you know, in terms of, I think they rely on you, of course, to have that vision and to have pretty much most of the answers all the time. But at the same time, it's okay to say you're not sure.
Yeah, I love that. Humanity and humility preceding the preconceived role of a director.
Yeah, you said it better than me. And, you know, look, how many people want to work for that guy, you know?
Yeah.
probably more so, right? And you'll find, week 3 or whatnot, and you're still enjoying the time with each other. It's the electricity, it feels amazing that we're all on the same page. We've all cared for each other. We're all trying to fight for that particular vision. It belongs to all of us. And so I found myself, it's almost a currency, to just, to treat people how they should be, as opposed to the other director, I suppose, who is fairly, might create a toxic environment because their singular passion is only what they want, and all of that stuff. That's gone. That's gone now. That type of profile.
Totally. And at least hopefully it's on the way out anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
What do you think then is a common misconception that people might have about the role of director?
Well, I think just what we touched upon, Jason. I think you'll be surprised at how collaborative the experience of directing is. That doesn't take away from, the responsibility for delivering a great show, but always fall upon the director. That's kind of, that is the responsibility of a director. However, how we get there, you'll be surprised on the way the allies that are just there ready to support you when you feel your back is against the wall. And I think that's what I think people, you go in at the early stages, you go in a little solitary thinking life or death, if I don't break this. But through the process, you realize, this team here is going to make you fly. And if you can rely on that, if you can inspire an environment for people to do their best work, sometimes you just step out of the way, sometimes you step in, but it's phenomenally dependent on a gang.
Totally. I do want to just acknowledge something you said there, which was at the end of the day, delivering the show does still fall on your shoulders as a director, and you are the person who will have to go in for viewings and get notes.
Yeah.
So while that team are all there to support you, I suppose having a clear vision and knowing what it is you're willing to stand over when you get into an exec review is really important as well. And how you manage that that's where that collaboration piece, I think, becomes really vital in how you deal with people, because you want, in my experience, someone's going to have a better idea than me. I want those ideas.
Yeah.
But every now and again, someone may give you an idea that in principle is great, but it just doesn't work because maybe, as you were alluding to, it doesn't hit the story beat the way we need it to. I'm rambling a little bit, but I just thought it's also an important piece to remember is that you have to stand over the work, and you would be the one who does not get rehired if something goes poorly. No. Crews could still be back, but you may not.
I mean, I think that's part of the job. And I also think that, as a director, you're the most equipped in understanding the story over anyone, because you've had the time in pre-production, you've had access to the writer and the producer, you've broken down that script, you've researched and analyzed almost every part of that scene, and it's not necessary that the crew or even the cast have arrived with that much time put into the actual show. So I have an advantage of all of that intel and research. So that gives me an authority already. So you have to also, you're absolutely right. You have to have, it gives you that conviction of vision. So it allows you to make those kind of decisions. So, and when you go into that executive review, which is always the scariest part of the entire process, you can't really say it was because the gaffer said it'd be a great idea if we shot it from that angle. That doesn't mean it. It's not, it's your job to make the call, and to own it at the end and to say, well, this is my responsibility. This is what I'm delivering to you. That's my contract to the producer, the top and tail. Sometimes producers aren't so worried about how you treated your crew or how much you didn't do. They just kind of want to see the result. And if they like it, they'll hire you again. It's not right. But I think the greatest tribute, I suppose, for me is when, yes, getting a great review creatively, illuminating their show. Of course, that's all we live for because we want to get hired again. But, still being like mates with my crew after rap and, still having that genuine kind of connection, from my first short film 20 years ago to the last show that I did, I still stay in touch with my crew because we just developed a genuine connection as friends. So that's been pretty cool. And that's what I think, that's one of the takeaways that I feel is, a great measure of success too.
Totally. And I think I love that you're talking about success in that way, because in this industry, I often ask myself the question is, how do I define success and what does success look like? And it looks like it's different for everyone. And when you get to one level, you want to move to the next and all those kind of things. So I think having measures similar to that is really great and vital for keeping you engaged.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, for anyone who doesn't know what an exec review is, as we're talking, it's that at the end of making a show and when you've locked your episodes, you have to sit down and watch those episodes with the executive producers or the series producers, whoever is on, and get those episodes kind of signed off on. You put it much more succinctly than what I was alluding to when I was trying to ask that question. As you said, you have spent as a director so much time with those stories and interrogate them so deeply that you do have more authority over the story and you know it better than anyone else. I think what you said was, having done that work, it's the thing that allows you to have a conviction of vision, which I thought was just a lovely way of putting it. So I just wanted to come back and kind of reiterate that. I guess next, though, because while you have been directing a whole load of great telly, you do still write, and you're a writer-director. And I know that you have kind of a slate of different projects, features at different stages of development. And I would love to discern how Waris, the writer, as opposed to the television director who has a little less autonomy over the writing process, likes to work, and kind of dig into whether you actually have your own kind of writing process or how you approach your writing.
What worked well for me is, in between directing gigs, I had this other skill set that I could sort of do, which was to write. So often something as social and physical and all consuming and enduring as directing, it felt like a respite to just then suddenly be solitary and write just with myself and the laptop. So that was that kind of weird dichotomy in my life has always served me well. When you spent time with a script, then you kind of get excited about going on production. And then when you're exhausted and 100% spent on a production, you're excited about just being with a with a screenplay that you want to write. So, from the very beginning of my career, as I mentioned, I've always been kind of hustling both. And, if I'm not doing one, I'm certainly doing the other, So that became the kind of routine, if you like, for myself. And I felt it was quite healthy because when we had the various apocalypses in our industry where directing was a lot more difficult, commission was constricted, etc., getting gigs was tough. I never felt like I'd stop working because I would start working on my writing slate, and I would even get commissions in as a writer. So and then when that would come to its natural ends, there'd be time to, or when a directing opportunity came, I would time it accordingly and schedule the writing so it finishes before I have to start work. And that's something I've come to terms with now, which is, it's a great way to ride out those storms when, I think as a director, and only as a director, I would feel quite suffocated and, in the spaces in between. What am I doing? I need a production to be And without, so I found a lot of solace in that type of style. My writing process has always been the same. I think, to be honest with you, when I crossed at the very beginning of my career, when I crossed the Rubicon of actually making, finishing a good spec script, a good spec feature, I felt quite empowered by that experience. It's really hard to finish a script and come to the end and then put it out into the industry. That in itself is a celebration. We should celebrate that, and it's even if it doesn't get made. But when I had done that very early on in my career, I never felt daunted by the criticism I would get if I would write another project, because I knew that I'd finished a script. I'm able to do it. And that confidence meant whatever I did, whatever followed, I've still got the ability to do it. And I think that was important for me as I carried on writing, where I didn't get the breaks with some of my scripts, and sometimes I did. And so that informed my writing. And when I eventually, if I get an idea or whatever, and I start that process, what's important for me is I write every day. Now, whether that's a commitment of one page, or, it's doing a bit of research, or whether it's a few hours, or even if it's just an hour, it's every single day. And everybody has that time, actually. I've got kids, family, commitments, and sometimes I'm even in pre-production. But I always find at least half an hour, 1 hour, sometimes more than that, sometimes a whole day if I'm lucky, just to dedicate on development and writing. And then when it comes to actually writing the script, the process becomes 2 or 3 pages worth of screenplay a day or whatever. And then in a couple of months, my math is correct, you've got a first draft. And essentially, it gives you perspective of the time. You can lose if you don't have structure, you can lose yourself in not actually generating anything over a while. So it's good to, have some kind of structure like that, I think.
Do you begin with, will you write treatments first and kind of beat out the entire story before you actually get to putting words on paper in screenplay format, or will you just dive in and start typing on a blank page?
So for my money, the most exciting part of the whole process is, when you start writing the script in format, you start to see it. So the sort of technique I use is I do absolutely everything before I start that journey. So I put the research together, the outline, some scenes and ideas. I'd map out, all the characters. I'd understand everything. And I can feel myself desperately aching to put fingers onto, a keyboard and write. And I stop myself because I know that if I just get all this stuff done before, because once you start writing, it's hard to go back. It's almost impossible to, unwrite, because, you're so sort of precious about it. So I do almost entirely as much as I can before I touch that script format, and then essentially, even then, once you put it onto, final draft and format it, and you get a script, which is the most exciting, journey to get, to complete. And you start the hardest process, which is the rewrite,
I do.
Jason.
I was going to ask you what's the most difficult part of being a writer, but maybe we touched on it there, being rewriting, which we will absolutely discuss. But is there anything else that you think is particularly difficult?
I think getting started, I think, and finishing a script. I think these bookends of the process are probably the 2 things that most writers talk a lot about, and, don't really put in the kind of labor, and I think I've met so many better writers than me, and, so much more accomplished, screenwriters. And I just think the only thing that I think makes me a little bit more competitive is that I will I will finish a screenplay, and I'll have something for you, if that is a deadline. And, sometimes you're commissioned and you can work towards a schedule, but it's important also not to have that and be able to work towards a schedule anyway. If you're unpaid, unpaid development, that's more expensive. It's your time. So you have to make sure that you can, actually retrospectively look back and think, okay, I spent that time and I managed to finish this amount of work, as opposed to looking at it in such an ambiguous space, And I think what's important, particularly if you're not getting commissioned, is to have an industry sense of your work, understanding, why this would have a place in the market, understanding what sales agents and distribution would be interested in, what you can achieve. I mean, I don't wish to be so commercial about what you write, but ultimately you want something that not only is soulful and speaks your mind, but has an audience and can be exciting for a producer to give to the industry. And I think you got to have all that at the very beginning, and that frames you quite well. It gives you even a sense of how long you should be working on a particular project and whatever.
And at the end of the day, scripts become films or TV series, which are inevitably products. They have to be sold as products. While we may not like that and you want to approach everything from the perspective of art, there has to be a balance. There has to be a business sensibility, I think, to everything we do as well.
Yeah.
So rewriting, do you have a defined process that allows you to begin rewriting, or do you just kind of reread your script, make your own notes and have at?
Well, it's always different depending on how far you've got with your first draft. I think I tend to write a fairly strong first draft, and then I've got to step away from it. I'm the least qualified to give myself notes at that point. And then I've got to go through that kind of acceptance that, a lot of this will have to be changed and whatnot. And that's okay, because I feel what I feel comfortable about now is that even if scenes have to be striped or rewritten, some of that can still be put in a bank, be used another time. So you don't have to look at it, as a completely disruptive experience when you're rewriting. If you take something out, you put it away, and there's elements in there that you fell in love with that could probably be used on another script or even in the same one later on, or not at all, but it's still there. That's how I think that's the conversation that you sort of have with yourself, try and convince yourself. But it's important for me, I surround myself with, I think it's harder to find great readers than it is to find great writers in this industry. So I surround myself with people that can offer constructive editorial notes. I try not to have too many, because then it becomes designed by committee, and I think, it's important to have people that kind of understood where you started and trying to realize your own vision and can offer constructive, objective criticism. So that's hard to find but I've managed to, over the journey, have great people that can offer that help, same way we help each other out. And with those notes, I just start again. I look at what needs to be done, and that's very tough, because you're going back. You're not going into a blank canvas. You're sort of surgically going into places that you felt had been fixed or doesn't need fixing, and that is tough. And I think that sometimes can be quite difficult emotionally, but it's the most important part of the process. And then the reward of that is that you've fixed your project. And what I tend to do is at the rewrite stage, I would do another outline with all the notes, and then I sort of put it next to my screenplay and look at it, what survived and what didn't, and that's how I would restart the next journey. And eventually it becomes less painful, and then you fall back in love with this new version. And that's kind of what you take back to your industry partners or friends. And hopefully you've got something pretty good at that point. What I wouldn't advise is writers to jump so quickly onto the screenplay, because and you know, the embellishment of dialogue and sexy stage direction, you know, that stuff can actually be removed. But you know, things like plot and, you know, stakes, character arcs, they're so vital that you get right before you know, right. It's so hard to untangle a script that's already kind of, you know, got so much in it. That's, you want to get all that right before you jump into a script. So even my rewrite, I don't think is, hopefully, not suffering those basic issues. It should be you know, manageable at that stage.
I love all of that. Super important, as you said, just to know what you're going to write before you start writing. And I love the idea of actually taking the notes that you're getting and rewriting your outline and then doing that kind of side by side. I'm going to steal that and I'm going to try it. So thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so what is something that you know now about this industry, be it directing or writing or both, that you wish you knew when you were starting out?
I think we touched on a few things today. We looked at how important it is to be sort of the humility side of directing is such a important ingredient. I didn't know that at the beginning. I was convinced it was, you know, when I started out, I assumed it was a weakness, my personality, you know. Instead, it became, you know, one of my strengths. I think you have to still be, you know, fairly strong and be able to, you know, actually strong enough to support your own ideas and yourself. You have to be centered in that. But you don't have to be a tyrant, you know. And I remember starting out thinking, God, I have to be this type of personality to really get people to do what they, you know, that they should do. And I couldn't be that guy on the floor. I just wasn't able to scream and shout at people if, you know, there was a, you know, a Costa cup in the back of a shot, you know. I found other ways. I just found my own personality in dealing with anything, everything. And that gave me agency. And also it was something I learned that was very new throughout the process, that, you know, just being your authentic self and being a human being gets you way more currency than any other thing.
What advice would you have for emerging writers or directors or writer-directors, new entrants, someone today gone, maybe I want to do that?
Yeah, I think, I may be so humble, is we often feel that the industry should bail us out. We think that it should offer us opportunity and help accelerate our career when we have no opportunity left. And I think your relationship with the industry isn't that. If you're breaking into it, you have to, you know, you're responsible for that. You can't rely on the industry to offer you opportunity. You have to create opportunity. You can rely on the industry to be principled, to safeguard, and to offer, you know, parity and take responsibility for conduct. But getting opportunity, making that break, that's on you, you know. And I think particularly in the UK, where sometimes even as mavericks, we're slightly institutionalized into thinking that the industry is going to bail us out, you know, whether it's for writing or directing, you know, is probably not a mindset that will help you in your journey. You know, once you work for the system, of course, you have to work within those rules. They're paying your salary. But I think, you know, if you're trying to break that glass ceiling, you know, you've got to make a great short, write a great script, but hustle people for those meetings, create opportunity, and then really, you know, then start working the system. You know, in America, in the States, you feel that, you know, that energy, that electricity in that independent filmmaking world, and they're out there just getting stuff done. for every, 10, terrible decisions and films that are backed, there's one incredible film made. And we're naturally risk averse in this industry in the UK, which means, there might not always give you the kind of opportunity that you feel you need or deserve. So create it, I would say. I think that's the best advice I would give anybody.
I love that advice. And I think it's also just, in general, good life advice. You said the industry doesn't owe you a job. You got to create those opportunities and ensure that the industry knows you're good enough for jobs when they're available. I think it's that idea of luck is like hard work meeting opportunity. Personally, I don't think there's just these mad lucky strokes where you just happen to walk down the street with a camera and someone goes, hang on a minute, you're going to direct an episode of Game of Thrones.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's a good principle for just life in general as well. So great advice for anyone. Lastly, I was going to ask, what is coming up next? And is there anything that you can share that people can go and check out or that they should keep their eyes open for?
So we, middle of this year, we wrapped On the Bay. And so that's out now on ITV. And recently I have moved into formal development with 2 of my screenplays. So that's, I suppose, where I'm at. I'm still that 16-year-old kid with a backpack and a Capri Sun and socks in my bag, wanting to hit LA. I still haven't been yet. So I'm hoping these films, allow me, that access.
Amazing. Well, I've no doubts that they will. And I can't wait to hear about that trip to LA when it materializes. What I will say is, Waris, thank you so much for taking the time and for sharing so openly and honestly. And it's been a pleasure.
It's been great. Thank you, Jason. Thank you so much.
And that's a wrap on Waris Islam. Thank you for listening to the Filmmaker's Playbook. If you're enjoying the show, please follow and rate us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It's a great, cost-free way to support the show. If you're interested, you can follow me on Instagram at Jason Branagan Director, and you can follow Waris at Waris Islam. Links and social media handles are in the show notes. Join me next time when I talk to Second AC, Sean Weiss.